Hey, welcome to the Drawing Solo podcast. My name is Mason McKinney, and I'm with.
My name is Patrick Tsao, aka Machiavelli 33. I'm the primary artist on the comic Half Man, and I'm an artist in my own right.
Nice. And if you, lovable reader, want to find out how to get inspiration from anywhere, make sure you sign up to my newsletter and get a free ebook that'll show you how to do so. My gift to you. So, Patrick, where are you from?
I am born and raised in Los Angeles, but I've been in New York City, and Brooklyn specifically for about 15 years. So whether or not that makes me a proper New Yorker, I don't know. That's up to other people to determine.
Oh wow, from West Coast to East Coast. How's that?
Sure
How's
is.
how's that shift?
I don't mind the population density. I've always been a big city kid myself, but weather could use some improvements. Growing up in the desert and going to New York, it's it's a little different. Could really definitely go for some drier summers.
Nice. I hear that. I hear that. Let's see. What? Tell us what again. One more time. What do you create?
I am the primary artist on a science fiction webcomic called Half Man, also available in print, so it's a print comic and a webcomic. It's Half Man at halfmancomic.com. And I'm also an artist in my own right. I post my art to Instagram at Machiavelli33, and I also hang up my art in galleries around New York and around Brooklyn.
Oh, what kind of art do you create? What kind of I would say, how would you describe the art that you create that you put up on galleries?
The art that I create for myself and for the gallery shows is mostly, I describe it as exploring the darker, beautiful parts of the human condition. I'm really fascinated by sort of dark, surreal, macabre art. And that's the kind of stuff that really fascinates me and stirs my imagination. A lot of it is informed by really intense emotional moments. You know, those sorts of emotional moments that um, when you're experiencing them, you just need to get them out of you somehow.
Hmm.
Um, Moments like that. Very often, my pieces are um, they're images that hit me at 3 a.m. and I'll start painting, and it'll be 8 a.m., 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and I'll be just like, okay, this is what I'm doing today, I guess. Yeah, that's usually where those things come from.
When do you have time to sleep? When you're doing something at 8 a.m., 2 a.m. to the 8 a.m.?
Whenever I'm tired enough that I pass out, I'm very lucky to work from home, and my comics work is, um, it's deadline based rather than hours based. So as long as I turn in the work on time, I'm all right. So I can kind of set my own hours. I'm very fortunate in that respect.
Okay, nice, nice. So, why do you create?
Why do I create? Because it speaks to me. It sings to my soul. Is a good way to put it. Um, I've always been an artist of some sort, and yeah, it's things that I need to do. I guess it's I've always done it, and it's always been no matter what I'm doing, I've always found a way around to doing it in some form or another, and so now I just try to do it as much as I can in order to myself. Um, Keep my soul as enriched as possible so that I can be my best self.
Have you been involved in other sorts of art that led you up to the stuff that you create today?
Absolutely. Outside of illustration and digital painting and comic making, I went to school for 3D animation. So I started in 3D animation, and from there I also learned special effects and motion graphics for film and movies, and compositing and those sorts of like Photoshop compositing art, um, and 2D digital animation as well. I've learned, um, I'm one of those kind of guys who like sees potential in like every art form and wants to do a little bit of everything, like for
Hmm.
better or for worse. I definitely am constantly in danger of spreading myself too thin. So I know a bunch about a lot of different kinds of art. Lately, it's been a lot of comics and illustration and sort of static 2D art for myself.
That kind of reminds me of a saying or like something that I've heard a while ago from, well, several years ago from a YouTuber named Bodo Dante. And it was talking about using AI as a tool. And like at the very early days of like AI imagery, everybody was scared that was about to take their jobs.
Mhm.
And I remember him saying something along the lines of real artists will not be scared of like this whole AI thing because the only people who are scared are craftsmen. And the way there's any sad a difference between like artists and craftsmen. Artists are people who will create no matter what circumstance and no matter what tools are at their disposal. If they have something to create, they'll use anything to create it. While craftsmen, they use a specific thing to they're focused on a specific thing and they create for, I guess for lack of a better word, from how I understand it, they create to create. Nothing, there's like more or less without an end goal uh outside of like a personal satisfaction. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly have opinions on AI in general, and most of them aren't that nice. I'll forewarn you on that.
Yeah, yeah, get into it.
Primarily, like as far as the difference between artists and craftsmen go, um, I think like the way that was framed might like be sounds like it might be like a little disparaging towards craftsmen. I think like there is like an art to craft. There is definitely a difference between arts and crafts.
Yeah,
Of course, like
absolutely.
art is communicative and craft serves a purpose, but there is also an artisanry to crafts, and like I think craft is like design, and like sort of visual design, graphic design, that sort of thing. And it's a task with the intended purpose of solving a problem, and solving the problem, it's solving perhaps a really nuanced problem, right? Like in graphic design, it's like I want a logo that really communicates all these very vague ideas, these very vague but powerful ideas. Um, and that also has to be like visually readable and visually recognizable and distinct, and also communicate the things that you want to communicate. Things like craft for like website design has all these like functionality requirements. It has all these like visual requirements and that sort of thing. Like in say chair construction, like designing and building and crafting a chair. If there's all these requirements such as comfort and functionality, but also like individualized needs. It's something that uh, like to loop it back into AI, like those things can't really be replicated by AI.
Hmm.
Like craftsmen have a lot to be scared of because, and I think it's fairly legitimate, because there's mainly like the question of sustainability, right?
Right.
Like there's always the idea that of course like the human touch of craft, uh, you know, despite all the tech bros' best efforts with regards to these sorts of things, won't be replaced by such a thing as AI,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I
But
get. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
oh, sorry. But at the same within the same breath, there's also all this more like rote accessible work that gets like replaced fully. Like you're talking about replacing jobs. This is replacing a lot of like jobs and work for such craftsmen, and perhaps that makes it more difficult for them to continue doing their thing. Now, like In terms of uh, being scared of AI generally, I think that's less of like, there's reasons to be scared of that as a craftsperson or as an artist specifically. But I think it's more the more generalized environment that's emerging around the AI thing and the way, like, sort of uh, uh, the corporatism has been treating it. That's more the concern. You know what I mean? It's like, where do, like, the creators of AI, where do their priorities lie? Where do, like, there's, because the thing is, there's a lot of use for AI, a lot of good
Hmm.
use, research, scientific research, programming, coding things, that, like, eliminating the grunt work and that sort of thing, like the mindless grunt work that people hate to do anyways, those sorts of things. Um, and scanning the skies for things that are patterns, going through, like, recently I just read that AI can help determine where there's off gassing of toxic pollution gases out in the Amazon, so that people can determine where polluters are and where people are, like, doing that sort of thing to help clean up our environment and whatnot. That's great. That's for that. Is that what the people who are making AI are focusing on? It's not. The first thing that they try to do is replace artists, like, actually, because even though AI art programs aren't capable of doing that, the hype and the talk surrounding it was very much based on that. Was like, anyone can just be an artist. We don't need artists anymore because you can just do it yourself without any skills. And that was, like, the conversation surrounding AI art. That's how it was put out there first. And that really makes me, like, me personally, like, kind of cock my head at where the priorities for this lie. It's like, is it really for the betterment of humanity, or are you just trying to, commodify something that's otherwise very human and very personal? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. First thing that I wanted to say was I wanted to like say something like a the artist probably the artists innovate while the craftsman perfects. I guess that was like one of the this something that came to my mind while
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of this conversation. And the second thing was I really have a problem with AI with tech bros calling themselves AI quote unquote artists. I feel like I wouldn't have any problem with it if they just called themselves like some sort of directors, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's what they're essentially doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it's the whole conversation. It felt like a flat circle. Like I remember back when I was back a couple years ago when storytime animations were a thing on YouTube. And storytime animations was just, for people who don't know, a storytime animation on YouTube was essentially just somebody telling a story about anything that happened in their life, and it and with a backdrop with a backdrop of a, couple of drawings to tell people or just guide people throughout the story. And people were calling and those storytime animators were calling themselves animators, while the old internet animators who actually would try doing things frame by frame try to apply the principles and what was it, the principles, uh,
Principles of animation.
yeah, the
Yeah.
principles of animation with their with how they present their work. And then here comes the new age quote unquote animators who would just make slideshows, and there was a huge disparity. There was a huge like disparity between the two, the I guess like the old internet and the new internet.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I just kind of saw like I just kind of saw like something like that. I just felt like if there was like a different label, if people just labeled themselves differently, there wouldn't be as much of a disparity. But I know I get all the grievances that people would like see art that would be made that heavily referenced or just took from their art, because I get weirded out when I see art, when I see my own drawings posted in a thing that I posted in a place that I didn't post. You know,
Hmm.
uh, it's there's a weird and uncanny feeling to it,
Yeah, that's
but
certainly true. I mean, like, a lot of these, like, these tech bros, they either want to claim themselves as artists or they want to ascribe a certain level of, I want to say, human agency to these AIs, where it's like, oh, it is real art. They're making original art. It's not just. It's usually in response to people saying, like, that the AI is like plagiarizing, right? They're always saying,
yeah,
like, a lot of people argue it's like, oh, they're plagiarizing, and you should pay all the reference artists for their work and whatnot. And
yeah,
then the argument comes back. It's like, no, the AI is making original stuff. It's like human beings. And sure, I can see that. Yes. And that what my reaction to that is that means not that the prompter is the artist, but that the prompter is just simply a very demanding commissioner of art. And it
they
just so
didn't.
happens,
I would
yeah.
say commissioner. That implies they put money into it.
Oh, right, exactly. But, like, just because the artist doesn't know doesn't even know how to be doesn't even know enough to know that it's being exploited, doesn't mean that it's not being exploited. You know what I mean? So the
Hmm.
AI artist, if you would want to ascribe this level of human agency and, like, art originality to it, which I could see, then treat it like a human being, right? Treat it like a human artist. Pay it. If it doesn't know how to use money, well, too bad. It just sits in an
Give it
account
oil.
forever.
Give it what robots want. I don't know,
Yeah,
oil or information.
yeah, exactly, or whatever. Or if it doesn't even have the moving parts to even know what to do with money, well, then too bad. It just money just sits in a pile somewhere and just wastes away because they want to give it human agency. Well, then treat it like a human. Like, there you go.
That kind of
You
reminds
know?
me of there was this one case of I forgot what the specifics of it, but I do remember there was an instance where a chimpanzee stole a photographer's camera
Yep.
and took a selfie of it,
Yep.
and it like there was like a whole court case of who owned the copyright, but
Mm-hmm.
because the chimpanzee doesn't have human rights or human rights, it didn't belong to the chimpanzee. And just because it used the photographer's camera, that doesn't mean that camera belongs to the photographer.
Right, exactly. It
So
doesn't mean that anything that was taken by that
yeah,
camera belongs to the photographer. That's
yeah,
like, I know about that case. I know about the photo. I
that,
don't know
that
about the
was
whole thing,
interesting.
and it's honestly still controversial. There's still hot takes in all directions to this day, even though the court decided one way. Like, there's still arguments to be made in either direction. Yeah, yeah, I know
Yeah,
exactly what you're talking about.
and the other thing that linked to my mind was how you can't make anything on on company time. Like if you draw something, like if you work at a like a creation job, like a
Oh
corporate
yeah.
creation job, if you and like anything that you use, like any of the companies, it doesn't matter if it was like on your own property or the company's property.
It
Like if
belongs
you,
to them.
yeah,
Yeah.
it belongs to them because technically they pay you per hour to be there, and everything that you make on their dime, it belongs to them.
Yeah,
And
I
that
mean,
was
in that case, it's like, human agreements. Like, you
yeah,
have the agency, you have the will to understand what you're getting into and whatnot.
yeah,
With things like AI, with the chimp, like, things get a little bit weird and
yeah.
softer, at least as far as I'm concerned.
I'm so glad there's no end user license agreements with Polaroids or anything like that. Like
Oh my
that.
god. I mean, I'm sure they love it these
Oh no,
days. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. That's the closest they can get is just metadata of like how of
Oh
what
yeah.
camera was taken what hardware was
Hmm.
used to take that picture.
Hmm.
But I wanted to. You said you were had a background like 3D and like special effects. Like, how does that skill transfer over to like what you're doing now in terms of comics?
In terms of what I'm doing now, earnestly, it doesn't translate too much aside from just, like, having a general artistic sense and having kind of lived sort of visually and in terms of in a way that, like, prioritizes communicating visually with others. So I've always kept those instincts active, even when I was working in animation and 3D animation, no less. instead of comics or painting or things like that. But that's the thing that I like about all these different art mediums is that they're all very different. Their priorities are very different, but because they're very different, they're able to do and accomplish very different things that the others can't. Animation can do incredibly unique things, both like artistically and like emotionally in the moments that it can create in the viewer that comics, novels, paintings, or even movies just
Mhm.
can't. And that potential is always what makes me want to grab all these different art mediums and try to master them. Yeah, so like even when I was working in animation and studying animation and such, I always wanted to be painting. I always had the desire in me to be painting and to be doing comics and such because of that. So
Okay. I get that.
yeah,
I get that. What would you like to see more of in your creative field?
in my creative field, well, there's two immediate ones. There's comics and there's art. Comics, I would like to see more publishing accessibility for independent creators. Right now, at least in the West, for sure, it's still largely dominated by superheroes. Like the industry is the wheels that the industry turns on are largely superhero based. And there's not like in terms of like independent creators, the entry points for them are a little bit nebulous and a little bit mysterious in terms of how to get in. Whereas, like my most direct comparison is Japan. Like Japanese industry has a little bit more than its own fair share of unique problems, but they have these magazines that publish a bunch of different comics at once in a series, and have your popular comics that everyone knows and wants to read in the front of the comic, and towards the back there's always a couple of slots for independent, unheard of creators to just write and create and draw whatever. And if it doesn't work out, that the editors will say, "Great, this doesn't get a lot of views. We'll get somebody else next issue." And if it does get a lot of views and a lot of requests for more people, then um, they'll give it another run the next issue. So then that's how smaller creators. There's a pipeline for smaller creators to get noticed, and we don't have that here.
So,
We
like,
have we have a lot of like small press publishers and stuff like that, but there's no, but that stuff's kind of touch and go and kind of like random oases in the desert rather than
mhm.
a pipeline or like a literal river that you can follow towards the water source, so to speak.
So, like, if Western comics had an anthology, just huge press run of a all their superheroes, like a section, a gigantic, like Jump, like a Shonen Jump esque magazine that had like their
Hmm.
own superhero section, their own like indie section, or another section of a different genre. I mean, I don't think superhero. Actually, I wouldn't say superhero is superhero a genre because it feels like a
I mean, they're on their. They're
yeah,
sort of like the culture is shifting,
yeah.
thankfully, about freaking time. Slowly, as culture does, but it is shifting. But I would say culture or superheroes are still like a pretty huge share of everything. Like you go
Yeah.
into any comics shop, it's just like there's at least half the shelves are still dedicated to like the combined Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, like all those like things, Um, where and it's always often about like a very similar like guy in a suit or a guy with superpowers doing a thing. Whereas like you go other places, you can see either superhero comics or you can see like a comic about like sports or you can see a comic about cooking or something like that,
Hmm.
or a comics about like life or whatever. And we don't like we have that in bits and pieces here, but it's not quite as established. The big thing that's really still like capital E established here in America and Europe and whatnot, it's superheroes.
Oh yeah, I can really attest to that
Hmm.
because when I go out and sell my comics to people in my neighborhood, in my backyard. I have four series going on at the same time, and people usually light
Goodness.
up. I notice people usually light up when it comes to the series that vaguely sound like superheroes. It was like one of them is a well, the first one, Purgatory Academy, Heaven, Hell, and 4 Years to Decide. Depending on the
Hmm.
person, they're like, oh yeah, I like the themes of religion and themes of ethics and morality. Second
Hmm.
one, a hidden island striving to find balance, and people who are usually like attuned to that, they like the idea of people trying to find like order in their chaotic lives,
Hmm.
or just understand, or just wants to see a slice of life of how other characters deal with the chaos that they have. The third
Hmm.
one, Let's Go Metal Hero, the one I co-write with a friend of mine, Matt Fennell, and that one's about like two siblings who want to turn a robot into a superhero, and people light up when they hear the word superhero, and then two siblings, and the last one, Just Reaper, um, also made by my co-writer Matt Fennell, and I helped co-write it, and I also illustrate it as well.
Awesome.
That one's a young Grim Reaper trying to keep hell off Earth, and people hear that concept, and I notice that they have that superhero, that heroic connotation
Oh
to
yeah.
it. So people usually like gravitate. I notice when people gravitate to the ones that has like a clear heroic stances. It's instead of the first two that has more of a slice of life, dramatic stance.
Hmm. And
But
I
it
and I get it because, like, even hearing the elevator pitches of these, like, a superhero is always like a much more straightforward and simpler concept,
mhm.
and people in general, their brains like simplicity. So I can understand why that appeals there, but it doesn't mean that has to be all we do.
It is like it is what it is,
Hmm.
honestly. But I completely understand. I completely understand. But
Hmm.
you said like the first gripe was a. Oh yeah, I also want to say, I also want to add it to that. I noticed that like the the way that shonen or just a lot of Japanese companies are able to make their huge anthologies is because they have so many different stories, and they have a lot of people releasing weekly just to prove themselves,
Yep.
and that's just an insane thing that I think that only they can get away with because they have that culture.
Yep.
And
It's a problem.
I don't want to say that, but that's cool, but it's a lot.
I mean, the
It's
masses are hungry.
masses are hungry, exactly, but it's weird. It's very weird how everybody can like take a step back and realize it's not a good thing. But there's something that like people on the outside cannot change, but while the people on the inside, they are accustomed to it, they are willing to do it, they're happy to do it.
Yeah,
So
they're incentivized to do it
yeah,
too.
they're incentivized to do it. So I'm not gonna say who are we to say anything, but it's something to think about and notice like what do we, and we have to put our own perspective, we have to put our own wants out of life to realize how can we learn from this, you know,
Oh, sure. I
because there's
mean,
always something to learn.
it's something I've realized, and this is going to get very philosophical for a second, but this is just like
That's
my
why we're
my
here.
my perspective on this is that something that I learned about human beings is that we're if they like human beings are incredibly variable and different creatures. There's very little that can be consistently said across all humans. But I think the one thing that can be consistently said about humans is that they will always be very good at finding what if there's a system, they will find whatever cracks or arrangements are in that system that they can push themselves into in order to give themselves an advantage and in order to make things better for themselves and not others. That is a real tendency. Like, this can be good or this can be bad. Like, it can be good in terms of, like, if it's a toxic system, they'll squeeze into it and make things better. less toxic. And if it's bad, like, they'll squeeze themselves into a very fair and equitable system and break it for their own advantage. So, like, and this applies to anything like economics, capitalism, like government, like, whatever it is. And when I look at the way comics inevitably, like something like comics industry inevitably gets arranged over time, I see that. And it's just a matter of people being more aware of how, like, if there's, like, badness or toxicity or poor practices in the system, that it's like, as long as they're aware of it, then they can do something about it. It may continue happening because human nature is what it is, but that doesn't mean that the good things aren't worth doing.
Yeah, I get you. I want to like backtrack a little bit when it
Sure.
says like you would like to see like better entry points for independent creators. I want to kind of push back a little bit because I think it really hinges on. I think where we are at today is a very interesting like a pretty interesting position in a
Hmm.
way that we, with the right know-how, anybody anybody can like take inventory and see success, like set out success within their means, and if you are self-aware enough to take inventory of what you do have, who do you know, and what is the most reasonable way to get to your desired goal bit by bit, it is possible to find success without a publisher. I think
Hmm.
the problem with a lot of artists today is that they feel like in order to reach that success, they need to have a publisher or a or an out yeah a publisher for lack of a better word to get people to see to see what they create. But in reality, a publisher is just nothing more than a megaphone. They they will do. I don't know if they're not even obligated to do their best to promote you,
Hmm.
but they just do what they do what they can. They'll say, "Hey, this person is making this thing," and if people vibe with it, they'll buy it, and if they don't, then they'll just cut their losses and go straight forward to the moneymaker that came before. And we see
Hmm.
it in almost every industry, not just in comics, just in literally anything. I guess we wouldn't have like I don't know how many seasons those Walking Dead's on, but we wouldn't have as many seasons of Walking Dead if it wasn't profitable. If they
Hmm.
didn't move, like if they took that money and made other things. I'm sure they did because every good company always diversifies their earnings into different projects, so the next project can be the next big thing. But when it doesn't, but when they get impatient, they will cut their losses and try to invest in a different project because
Oh yeah.
this is all what at the end of the day, even though you even though like the artist, I'm not gonna say you because I would say like even though like the
The
artist,
royal you.
yeah, the royal you. English is so weird. English is so weird. If the artist, I should say, if the artist is giving something a piece of their soul to a publisher that only sees this soul as no different than like a stock or just no different than an investment, a project, because this is all this entertainment industry is. Like if you
Hmm.
want to cut the relationship aspect out of it, like it is very much what projects are going to survive in the market or thrive in the market because
Hmm.
publishers don't have time to be trendsetters. That's what I see. That's my perception.
And
What are your
I
thoughts?
definitely see that. Absolutely. My big thing is like, yes, absolutely. The big way to counteract that would be to have a much more robust self-publishing pipeline,
Hmm.
which also doesn't exist. But in the meantime, the big restricting factor that publishers really address is, as far as I can see it, is resources, because it's not. Marketing is a big thing, yes, but it's also printing, it's also distribution, and getting it out to like comic shops or getting it out to
Mm.
different places and whatnot, and like printing 1,000 copies for just any old like nobody comic artist. It ain't easy. Can't
Mm.
imagine. It takes some upfront cost, and a publisher wants to pick something up and just make a run, even if it's like 200, 400, 500 copies. That's already way more than that small comic creator is able to do. And that's like, there's ways of getting to that for in our current system. Um, there's like a lot of like different disparate options, like whether it's Kickstarter or like little deals from comic from like small print shops and things like that. But that in itself, to me, is the problem. Is that there's no it's chaotic. There's no pipeline for it. So everyone out there is sort of scrabbling and want like there's woods, and there needs to be a road through the woods, like at least like a wagon pathway or something like that. Because right now it's just woods, and everyone's wandering around in the woods without anywhere to go. And people can figure it out and kind of hold up a light and be like, hey, over here is kind of nice for some certain situations, for some
Mm.
certain people, for some sort of things. But that doesn't work out for everybody. And if too many people crowd around that one thing, then suddenly it doesn't work anymore, even if it is. But if there's a road, then at least everyone can at least try following the road and see if it takes them where they want to go. And if not, then they can try wandering off into the woods themselves.
Mm. Okay. Like I saw, like when you said like there was like no like clear self publish, there's like no self publishing pipeline for like a smaller artist. I wanted to explore that a little bit,
Hmm.
because for me personally, I really don't like the idea when people say like there's no X, Y, and Z, because that just makes me
I guess
I guess I
I
just want
should
to say like it makes me feel like a little cartoon like Disney character. I was like, well, I'm gonna prove you wrong. You know?
well, the thing
It's
that,
like,
like, I should clarify
yeah. What do you mean by
is
that?
that, like, it's mostly a matter of, like, there's no, the problem is, like, the actual problem is resources.
Hmm.
Like, there are means of publishing your own stuff.
Yeah.
There's means of getting your stuff out there. It just costs. But if you want to get your stuff in front of a publisher, then they're like, the idea at least is that they front the costs, and because they have money in the game, they have skin in the game, and they market in order to at least make it back or something like that. That's usually like the idea of chasing after a publisher. It's not like I guess there's the clout of being associated, but
Yeah.
like as far as I'm aware, the whole like distribution logistics of like printing a bunch of stuff and getting it out there, it's a full time job,
Hmm.
and having someone do that, finding someone to do that, is not easy. It's actually quite difficult, especially if you're a poor, struggling comic artist who just wants to see his idea get out there, his very idea get out there.
Do you,
That's I guess what I mean is that there's no pipeline for just like going for like doing that, whether it's self publishing or like really publishing anything that's not comics, at least not in a major way. There's little things, but there needs to be more of it,
do you
I guess.
find value of something like that or that kind of task being so difficult?
It's very if you're not familiar with it,
Or like
then
how can we extract value of something being this difficult? Because because I feel like if something was super easy, everybody would do it and more trash will be made, because it's that easy, and
well the
therefore the
gate
market would be more flooded, and the people who are actually good at their crafts would get lost in the sea.
well they're getting lost anyways because
Yeah.
the gate is not skill, the gate is money.
Mm.
So like
Can you explain that a little
it,
bit more?
in terms of like if you've got if you're well off, if you're
Hmm.
extremely well off and you have the money to spare, then you could self-publish pretty easily. Just find any old print house and tell them, hey, I want 1,000 copies of this, and then go to a distribution place and say, "Hey, I want to pay you guys to send this random book I made to to these all these places." You can just do that.
Okay.
That's like, in that sense, yeah, it's really easy to get your like, do self publishing and whatnot if you have the money. But
Hmm.
that's the limiter there. The limiter is money. The limiter is not skill or quality of the story or any of that stuff. Like, so if the concern is, good stories and good artists are going to get lost because there's more crap or whatever, they're already getting lost because a lot of these great artists don't have the resources to do that, and just as often, like, the people who have the resources to just publish anything are just publishing junk. Just but they're rich, so it's okay, and they're able to do it. And if they can just hire a good marketing person, and then some shit just goes on shelves in Barnes and Noble or whatever, just because they wanted it to. That's definitely happened, like, at least a couple of times as I can recall. But yeah, so it's like a formalized pipeline for this sort of thing kind of equalizes the playing field, allows it to be more based on, not completely, of course. There's always going to be drawbacks to the system, but it at least allows the possibility um, of someone who doesn't have the resources, but who has great skill and great storytelling or art chops or something like that, to get noticed without also being mandated to be a good, like, marketer, publisher, negotiator, or whatever, finding the great deals at these sorts of things to be able to publish with what limited resources they have,
Hmm.
or if they're like, near penniless, then to not publish at all.
I think it's very interesting because we kind of live in a day and age of the internet where we have a lot of online publishers per se,
Hmm.
but it's difficult to actually get people to for people who have a large following. It's hard for them to find ways to monetize it, and I
Hmm.
think it's the problem isn't really to be being seen because you can go on webtoons and you can go on the canvas or just any other self-publishing webcomic site, and you can see people with a lot of notoriety, a lot of people commenting, liking, and engaging with their comics.
Hmm.
However, it's having a million, 10,000, having 10 million eyeballs doesn't equate to having $10 million.
Yep.
And I think what needs to be changed is instead of going to certain online publishers and hoping that we get the eyeballs there, and then we hope for them to pay the artist to make something exclusively for them for God knows how, like if God knows, like if it's gonna be a livable wage, you know what I mean?
Hmm. Yep.
We something we There needs to be like a change in the pipeline that instead of monetizing like a the traditional way through like books and downloading ebooks, even though that's great,
Hmm.
having people find a good an online publishing website, or well, I'm not gonna say publisher per se because I think old media publishing, like the Marvels, DC's, Image, and what so have you.
Yeah.
They're just an older version of like what's online publishers, where people post most of their web comics. I don't like. I think though the online ones are just more of an open gate than the old media, and I think that's
Hmm.
like a cool thing that's bridged. But anyway, I digress. I think that if if there was a way for people to monetize monetize traffic on their web comics, which they've been doing since like the early days of the internet when people had Google AdSense on their web
Yeah.
comics. But since everybody's like migrating to like different pockets of the internet owned by different corporations that really wants to find out how to make their wallets fatter so they can so they can advertise to other people to send young aspiring artists their way so they can grow so they can grow a bigger audience. Instead of I feel like we need to like leave those those big corporations and kind of return to tradition and in a way of comic publishing and finding ways where we can traffic monetize
Oh
traffic for
yeah.
people to read the comics instead of relying on like a Patreon. So the people who do read the comics for free can and it can like pay for just being there, you know,
Hmm.
or
I mean, that was a thing. Project Wonderful used to exist.
oh,
That went under. If you don't know about Project Wonderful, that was basically what you say is Google AdSense, but specifically tailored towards comic creators, web comic creators in specific. And it was a really good, like you get clicks through Project Wonderful and you get paid, and it was much more robust than the whole AdSense ads and whatnot. And then also the other thing is that like people tend to conglomerate onto these like big corporate sites and centralize because there are advantages to centralization. It's
mhm.
just that nobody else has stepped up to do it. So like all these corporations have like all this like massive infrastructure that they dedicate like a tiny amount of it to like supporting this sort of stuff in their sort of unconscious way, and that's why people like glom onto it. But like places like Hiveworks and to a lesser degree Spider Forest and those sorts of like uh, webcomic groups and support groups, like they do a sort of similar thing to that, but without like those sorts of like big corporate strings. And I think they're doing a really good thing. And if those things could like catch on more, that would be a way to do it too. Yeah.
I guess
Because like
yeah.
I noticed the thing that you say about like the high view count and the low monetary count is absolutely true. It's both true for comics and is true for art. Like the thing that I do for art, I follow a lot of artists that get tons of views and tons of engagements, and they don't see a lot of money for lots of reasons. Either they don't like create good avenues for monetization for their own art, or people just aren't that interested. There's a lot of enthusiasm, but not a lot of interest, that sort of thing. Like, yeah, it's of course a complex subject, but yeah, it's. I generally see what you're talking about as well.
Yeah, why do you think it's so difficult for artists to find ways to monetize their art to make a living off of it?
Um, I mean,
Like if they like,
there's a
I'm
many.
pretty sure there's like a multitude of reasons, but like, what's like the biggest one that you can probably find that you can probably think about?
I mean, in terms of like grand, nebulous, overarching reasons, I think that for another multitude of reasons, our culture doesn't appreciate art. It kind of really like people are more than happy to consume it and enjoy it. They don't really appreciate it, and whether that's because of culture at large, whether it's because of the way like tech and social media apps are set up, like that's you can go into the weeds on that, but like the grand effect is that like cultural appreciation for art is like lower, feels a lot lower, and a culture in general doesn't really value it. And also
It's so
on a
interesting.
more, yeah, and on a practical level too, that aside, is that it doesn't necessarily come to art types intuitively. You know, like many times artists are people like me who are just making art because they have something that they need to get out of them, or something they need to express. And once it's visible, um, a lot of times that's enough. visible to themselves. They can see it in front of them. A lot of times that's enough. And or they put it on, they put it somewhere where other people can see it. And a lot of times that's enough, even if they don't sell it. Like there's a lot of steps to getting to a point where you know you really want your art to sell. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, ties into the cultural bit a little bit because in the end of the day, like money is the most important thing in our culture, which is like you can go into some sort of dialogue on that, but
Mm-hmm.
it's the mismatch between our artistic priorities and monetary priorities. I think because like you know even if you do find the desire to sell your work, it's kind of a lot of work setting that up. You got to set up your website in a certain way. You got to set up your social media in a certain way. You got to get your shopping carts, and you got to catalog your work in a certain way, and make sure everyone can see it and shop for it and buy it. And also got to keep in mind for holidays and events, and you got to do gallery shows and art fairs and stuff like that, so people can find places to buy it and stuff like that. It's a whole lot of fucking work, and you're
Yeah.
already putting a lot of work into making your art in the first place. So you're just like, God damn it, in case you're wondering,
Mm-hmm.
I've gone through this myself.
Yeah, you sound like you're speaking through experience.
Yeah, a little
Absolutely.
bit.
I
Maybe a little bit.
I think you found the answer within talking about the problem, actually.
Hmm.
When you say like the culture that uh doesn't appreciate art.
Hmm.
When I go around selling comics or like showing people comics, see, or just looking outside or just looking around, we are surrounded by art. We live in a time where people do value and appreciate art. It's just that people don't appreciate artists.
Hmm.
And I see when artists strive to be appreciated, it's coming from a area where they demand where it's a I guess where they demand respect, but not externally instead of internally. And
Hmm.
I guess like the difference is it's the difference between a a difference between a protest and saying I'm not going to be involved. I'm not going to start being involved in this behavior unless I see X, Y, and Z. Because like people with that starts off with a self respect, they will see all the pitfalls before they even start being. They will see all the red flags before they start being abused by their commissioner or their boss or what have
Hmm.
you. So that would prevent future heartache of feeling undervalued.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, and since it's such a, it feels like something that like even happened with a lot of. Feel like I'm going going back in hip hop history,
Hmm.
where a lot of hip hop artists, from what I remember, they would have all these suits come in their neighborhood and saying, "Oh, you rap well, you're well spoken, you rap. I can make you a billionaire." And all the young rappers at the time, they just see a guy that looks professional in a suit, and all they hear is, "I'm gonna make you $1 billion just by doing what you do." But because they didn't have that foresight, they were essentially trapped making seven, six, seven, eight records, eight like albums for these people,
Hmm.
and they had no say in it because they signed the fine print because they did not know their worth. And
Yeah.
all it really takes is somebody to know your worth, not tell you how much you're worth, to abuse you. And that's why I we keep seeing artists constantly finding themselves not feeling appreciated because they didn't look within them. They always try to find that appreciation because they felt like the work that they created was that appreciation in of itself.
Oh
But not
yeah.
all,
I mean,
yeah, not everybody can see that as well.
it's definitely a case of where it takes two to tango. Like in terms
Hmm.
of like increasing the culture, like increasing cultural appreciation for the arts, the viewers and the consumers of it have to appreciate it more. The artists themselves also have to appreciate it more. Of course, absolutely. One of the things that you will see, you've probably seen, repeated ad nauseum in terms of like either artists or comic artists, creators, in terms of advice that they give to young up and comers is to value yourself. Don't underprice yourself. Don't undercut yourself. Even if you feel like your art isn't worth anything, or if you feel like you're an amateur, or you feel like it's not that great, or you feel like you can't compare, still don't undervalue yourself. Um, it's worth it, and it's a very human instinct,
Hmm.
imposter syndrome, to especially with something as sort of kind of soft and nebulous as art, to feel like what the stuff that you make isn't good, but that just means it's a constant. The need to remind is constant, and it's really important to always have that reminder that artists should value themselves uh, higher or just highly in general. But yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I remember when I was a kid, when I was start doing commissions, I was looking at like how should I what's a good starting point to price myself, and I always heard people say, "Oh, do what you want." It's like value
Mhm.
there's no set price. And I'm like that doesn't help me.
Oh yeah,
But
that's true too. I mean, being
so
able to give
I
good advice, that's a skill on in and of itself.
okay, so if somebody's starting off and wanting to do commissions, I have a something to tell people, undercut yourself until you get pissed off and then start going up from there, and then or price yourself so high you get nobody and then giving yourself discounts and then you
Yeah,
find that equilibrium, and then
yeah.
until you find that equilibrium,
I mean,
like
that'll definitely be really good advice for some people. The thing I've noticed is that there's a lot of artists, and that's really funny, by the way. It's really fucking good because, like, for that certain kind of person, like undercutting yourself to the point where you get pissed off, that only needs to happen once.
yes.
I'm one of those kind of people. I was like, I got paid like I remember I took like an editing job. It was like 3 days of editing, and I got paid $75, and I was like, this sucks. I'm never fucking doing this again. I don't even like the shit that I'm editing. This sucks. This is stupid. And it was like,
Yeah.
I learned that lesson. But there's a lot of people out there, like artist wise, especially when it comes to like comics and like the more like the less crafty arts, I guess, where they don't have a lot of confidence.
Hmm.
Their confidence is like all time low. Like if they end up taking the view that like oh, if I'm getting paid anything, that's great. I do it all for free, and like that's for those folks, it's a trap that they need to dig themselves out of. So like it's great advice that you got, but like this it
Yeah.
takes all kinds, unfortunately. So like, or for better or for worse, rather.
Yeah,
Yeah, this
I just want artists to be mad and grow a backbone
yeah.
before they get into like future mistakes.
Oh yeah,
That's
yeah,
what we
yeah.
need.
It's definitely wise. If they can get to that point, that's definitely great. Yes,
Yes.
agreed.
One more question.
What's up?
How can people support your goal?
My goal in terms of what, like culture, or in terms of like my immediate goals of my work and whatnot.
Either or, if you have
Um,
answers to them.
let's see. I mean, the easy thing for me, for my immediate work is to go to halfman.com, check out my comic, buy some physical copies, and in terms of and also subscribe to our Patreon. We have a Patreon, because that's the way you do things these days. So of course we do. Subscribe to our Patreon. We've got a tier where you can actually get your own face in the comic as an extra. Get killed by an alien.
Ooh,
See yourself die to an alien horribly.
nice.
How great is that?
Show it to your parents.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of my work, I've got a commission page up on my Instagram. You can commission me or buy prints from me. I have an imprint shop. Go to my Instagram at Machiavelli33, and you can find it all there. Buy prints, commission me for something for like that OC that you got, or that thing that you wanted to see, or that emotion that you wanted to see to feel expressed, I'm more than happy to indulge. In terms of the grander things of art, I will say this: it's very hard to change this sort of thing unless you are a person of influence and wealth and resources. But for the everyday person, if you've got an artist that you're really passionate about, uh, buy something from them, pay for their work. Um, Verbally expressing that that you're appreciative of the work, it does go a long way. But in the society we have now, monetary support is just as impactful, if not more. Support the artists that you like, and uh, do what you can to help them thrive.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, this has been the Drawing Solo podcast. My name is Mason McKinney, and I'm with.
I'm Patrick Tsao, aka Machiavelli 33.
And if you want to find out how to get inspiration from anywhere, make sure you sign up to the newsletter and get a free ebook that'll show you how to do so. My gift to you. Signing out.